Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. We created this podcast to share the wonderful people we get to interact with, we get to meet, we get to know, and most importantly, get to learn from. So I invite you to join us on this journey here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. But here we are having a wonderful opportunity to chat with David Sax, who's not only, he does two things. He thinks and he writes. And I think that's a pretty neat thing to be able to do, to have license to explore the things that you're interested in, develop ideas about how the world's working, could be working, or in this case, probably should be working, and get to share your thoughts and ideas with a community of people who are quite interested in what you write and the books you produce. So what a neat thing to be able to do.
Well, thank you, Jim. That's something I should remind myself of every time.
Every time you're stuck and you're on deadline for something, you know?
Yeah, I'm like, should I write another book? Oh gosh, what am I thinking? Like, I should have been in law school.
David, say hello to someone you've spoken with before, Matt Fordal. Matt is at Flowers. He's our managing editor of 1-800-Flowers, and you spoke to him last when he was at the New York Times and he was talking to you about one of your previous books.
Thanks, Jim. Good to see you again, David. I remember pretty well when we last talked, we had been introduced by a mutual acquaintance who I think was at the Edelman firm. And it was right when Revenge of Analog had come out. And it turned out that it was a perfect fit for a client we were working with. It was a good conversation then.
So David, give us a little thumbnail of your journey. I know you live in Toronto. I know you've lived in neat places like New York and Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro and Montreal. How did that all happen? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
Well, it all happened because I was born here. So let's go back to the beginning. I was a kid someone said, when did you know you wanted to become a writer or journalist? And like, my parents used to send me Newsweeks to summer camp, like Archie and Newsweek. I was like, I need to know what's happening with the Berlin Wall. I'm an 8-year-old. I'm
just a kid.
Miss out on all these things. Yeah, send me a telex to camp. So I was always interested in kind of the world, news, current affairs, history, and these sorts of things. I went to University of Montreal at McGill, and there continued to kind of take an interest in it and writing and studying history, and started doing stuff with the school newspaper and the school TV station, and knew by the end that I wanted to be a journalist. I actually wanted to be a foreign correspondent, a war correspondent. This was my last year was when 9/11 happened. And I was obsessed with the idea of becoming a far-flung war correspondent. But I then wisened up for the sake of my own safety and ended up living in Argentina and Brazil for a couple of years as a freelance correspondent. So I got the foreign part.
Just for the adventure, David?
Yeah, I was like, I want to live far away. I want to learn another language. I want to be in a different culture, and I want to be a journalist and write. And friends of mine were traveling to Argentina, and someone said, well, it's a great place to start. They just had this financial crisis. They're having all these elections. Go there and see what you can do. And that was it. It's just kind of got a ticket, went down, was pitching stories from a hostel, and then stayed for a couple of years. And because I was there and not many other people were there, I was able to pitch stories to all sorts of different publications. I was writing for Wine Spectator because they didn't have anyone down there. So I was a 23-year-old, who'd never drank anything that he couldn't buy for, I don't know, more than $10.
And here you are sampling all the great Malbecs of the world.
Going to wine tastings, being like flown to wineries. I mean, it was, I think I peaked at that age. And because it's not the center of the universe, it wasn't, Iraq or China at the time. I mean, I had to think broadly about, so I was writing travel stories, business stories, politics stories, radio stuff, magazines, and that really kind of opened the door to this broad-based kind of world. But I got into books because I had an idea when I was in university. There was a paper I wrote, which was about kind of the fate of the Jewish delis. And so I knew I wanted to write a book. So I came back, I found out how to write a book proposal. I sold the book, wrote that book, then I wrote about food for a couple of years. And it just kind of spiraled into like that book begat another book, and here we are 5 books later, 20 years later. And I still have the menu for the Jewish delis behind me.
Do you go by Katz Deli just to pay your respects?
Yes, yes, it is it's the Temple Mount.
And boy,
Sorry,
there's,
Matt, you
there's
asked
something
something.
about great pastrami. Matt, are you a pastrami fan?
I am. I love a good deli. David, a question that kind of follows in this timeline. When did the insight that produced Revenge of Analog come to you? And how long did that marinate in your mind before it produced the book?
So I was researching and writing that Deli book probably around 2007. And around the time, two things happened. One, smartphones came out. So all of a sudden, everybody I knew who had a real job were getting BlackBerries, and their behavior radically changed overnight. You would go to a dinner party, and all of a sudden, everyone was heads down, lost in this thing. You wouldn't even hear people talk. And I remember looking at my then girlfriend, now my wife, I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And so there
All
was this
thanks
radical,
to a Canadian company.
yes, less than 100 miles from here, and it was this radical transformation that all of a sudden computers were everywhere now, everywhere in your pocket and wherever it went. And the other thing was that at this exact same time, I was starting to see this nascent sort of green shoots of this analog revival, or this revived interest in analog goods and ideas. A board game cafe opened up by my apartment. Record stores, which were previously sort of declining and selling CDs, started carrying vinyl records again. And everybody was walking around with these paper notebooks, these moleskin notebooks, and bookstores were, opening when they shouldn't have. So kind of that idea began at that time. And I remember writing a book proposal about it. I think it was called The Digital Diet, probably around 2008, 2009. And I had sort of a couple of variations on that proposal, and my publisher and my editors, like their agent at the time, was like, I don't think this can sell, or we tried to, and they're not interested in it. And I just kept coming back to the idea. I would like put it to bed, and then every couple of years I kept seeing it grow. I kept seeing, more record stores opening, more bookstores opening, more people writing on paper. Something was going on as the technology digitally kept improving and becoming more ubiquitous with the iPhone and subsequent updates to it, and Spotify and streaming. The interest in analog only seemed to grow alongside it, and finally got around to convincing someone that this was a worthy topic to write about, and that was 2016 when that book came out. So it took some time, which actually was to my benefit, because that trend needed to emerge into its own.
Take us a step back, if you would, David, and give us some definition, if you would. It seems obvious, but maybe not. What do you think is digital, and what do you think is analog? Give us a little bit of clarity on how you define those two words.
Sure. Well, in a technical sense, digital is the language of computers, and it's binary, which means that,
ones and O's only.
Exactly. In an electrical circuit, something's either on or off, and that's it. Inside your phone, all those microchips, everything Intel's building, semiconductors. I mean, it's just a bunch of little on-off switches, and you add up those in the millions or billions, and it can make all sorts of things. And analog is not on-off. It's the real world outside of computers. It's the texture of things. It's the sound of things. It's the full sort of grand picture. So I use the term in really this sort of broadest sense, and it's really, if something is digital or driven by computers, or computers are at the heart of it, then to me it's digital. And if it's not driven by computers, if it doesn't require computers, then I say it's analog. And of course, it's an imperfect thing, right? There are, every record store has a computer at the front, and they might buy their stock and sell it on the internet. That doesn't make it a digital thing. That the core of that thing is analog. And in another sense, there are certain digital technologies or things that are done by digital technologies that are part of an analog experience. So it's an imperfect definition, but it's an imperfect world.
And as we read The Future is Analog, your newest book, How to Create a More Human World, it seems to me that the essence of what you talk about in the book here, David, is that you need to have an appreciation for those differences you just talked about. Embrace those digital things that give you more time, more efficiency, to curate and really enjoy the things about your world that are analog. Good meal, good experience, good conversation. But most importantly, it's to focus on the kernel of what makes all those things interesting, is that they're foundational for relationships.
Right. Correct. I mean, I think that's, this book is, I hate to say it, and my publisher hated when I said it too, but it is a pandemic book. It is a book about the years of the pandemic, and especially the experiences of people, centrally myself, when all we had to interact with work, with school, with friends, with our social life, with nature, was the digital options, was what we could access through a screen. And so the divide between analog and digital in that way became very stark, right? Analog was what you were not allowed to do. You were forbidden by law in most cases from doing it, at least for a period of time, depending on where you lived. And that difference became so crystal clear. Whereas before it might have been a theoretical thing. But, when you send your child to a real school in a building with teachers and friends, and they're in there, it's a very, very different thing from going to school on a screen. And I think we all saw, experienced, and felt what that was like in almost every facet of our life. And what I was interested in sort of highlighting and talking about is what deeper value did the analog world see, but through that experience? How did we realize the value of those relationships, whether it's a work colleague that we would used to sit next to and now we were just seeing them on Zoom, or your child going to school, or even something as simple as going to an exercise class and suddenly that exercise class is now online. What are the actual differences that we experienced? What was better? What was made better by the technology? And where did we really feel as though something was taken away from us? And that thing that was taken away from us, the value of it became apparent only once it had gone. And I think that experience for everyone is going to be different, but everyone's going to react to it in some way. I don't think anybody can say, "Oh yeah, no difference." It was all the same.
Let's pull on that string a little bit. I ask you to predict what we're saying about this period of time in the near and not so near future. But you've mentioned 3 events now that have had a big impact on our lives here in North America. You mentioned 9/11, the impact it had on you. Certainly, you talked about the financial crisis of 07, 8, 9, 10. And now, of course, the COVID experience. So we're far enough away from the others that we can clearly see what changed, what's different as a result of those 2 other major events, tragic in so many ways. And what about this one? When we reconvene over a hot pastrami sandwich in Katz 3 years from now, and it's much more in the rearview mirror, what are we saying about how our life has changed more permanently as a result of the COVID experience, do you think, David?
Well, so this is I'm gonna give you an answer, but it's going to be a roundabout answer because I'm a writer, so it's going to take me 300 pages worth of words.
And you want it in advance.
If you could, please. Here's my account number. It's late March, April 2020, right? You go on LinkedIn, you turn on MSNBC or CNN or whatever, the New York Times, and all the experts are saying, this is it. This is the new normal. There's no going back, right? The future was always going to be digital. This is what the predictions had said, the futurists had said, and now it's here. We're shopping online. No one's going back to a grocery store. No one's going back to a flower store. Your kids are going to school online. Schools are outdated. We don't need these. Like, this is, the predictions have arrived. And then what's amazing is how all of that is kind of, with the exception of like offices, which is still this tricky, sensitive area, so much of that is just reverted back to the point where like so many of these technology companies, their stocks are cratering because they had reinvested so much and like, oh, this is it. E-commerce is growing, 40% for the next 3 years. Invest all in this and invest money in Peloton and Zoom and all that. And all these stocks have just cratered because the prediction was that history and technology continues to grow in this upward curve, and it doesn't. And what we experienced was this test pilot of that all digital future that was predicted and being sold to us. And for the most part, most people said, no, thank you. I do not want all this. I'll take this part and this part and this part, but I'm good. I'm good on all that, right? Something like virtual school. I mean, if anyone tried to sell that to you, your kids, or your grandkids right now, it would be an impossibility. I would sell you the tar and feathers to kind of cover that salesperson and run them out. I would build the railroad to run them out of town.
But you'd buy the tar and feathers online.
There's a tar and feather shop over here. It's a hipster kind of thing, artisanal tar, sustainable feathers from inside Patagonia jackets only. And so this is my prediction.
Recycled Patagonia jackets.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, which I'm actually going to go take back to the store right after this because my zipper broke. That's another story. This is my prediction for the future. Is one, digital technology will only continue to improve and grow and do amazing things in new ways. Look at what's happened with artificial intelligence, language recognition, just in the past couple of months, right? It's upended all sorts of ideas and predictions and unleashed a torrent of thoughts about what's going to happen next, and every industry is going to be disrupted and so on. So all these things are going to continue to come and provide new challenges, opportunities, dangers, and so forth. But the other is that, and this is the thing I think we forgot, is that we are not digital, right? We humans are analog. We are flesh and blood creatures. We're animals living on this spinning rock, right? And as long as that continues to be true, and I imagine, and I hope it will be for hundreds of years, if not longer, then the needs we have as humans, as analog creatures, are still going to be this grounding factor in this world that's going to temper our predictions or ideas about the future. And so the world of digital works in these sort of absolutes, and it's all or nothing, and it's zero-sum game. Everything is going to become online. Every piece of writing, as Matt and I know now, it's oh, you're a writer, you're done. Chat GPT or Chat GPX or whatever it is going to be, that's going to take your job next week. You can do it so much better. And there's a limit to these things. There's a limit to what digital can give us because it's limited to the confines of the screen, right? We still relate to the world. We still relate to one another in a way that's so much deeper and richer and more meaningful than anything that we can build, any sort of technology that's out there. So I think as long as that's the central truth of our reality, which it is, unless you believe in sort of the singularity or some sort of digital rapture, then the future will always need to be related to that. And that will be the sort of central focus of the things that are actually going to matter. And so beware any prediction that predicts, AI is going to take all the jobs, or the computer is going to fix all these problems, or this is the sort of solution to these things. It's always oversold. And we always return back to the things that matter to us. And that's what the book is about. It's this. It's if we don't reflect on the experience of the pandemic, when all we had was digital, at least for a couple months, right? And say, hey, what was that actually like? And how do I now think about the future in terms of that? Can I think critically about technology in the future based on my experience when I was sitting in my sweatpants inside my house, looking at screens and screens and screens for hours a day, and I was miserable, right? What did I learn from that experience? If we can't learn from that, then yeah, we're doomed.
Well, what did you crave during that time that you, at least to yourself, said, I'm going to do more of this when?
People, friends,
exactly.
Family, relationships, right? Conversations face to face with another human being was the thing I craved the most. I was that guy who would go to the grocery store and his two, N95, and not like the good Korean, like flat, like this is, early on, like you go out and buy like a drywall mask, it was like a schwitz for your face, and go to the grocery store. And I'd be like chatting up the cashier for 5 minutes while everyone else is in line with their bags of yeast, and I crave that. And why? Because I'm a chatterbox. Fair enough. Guilty as charged. But also, human beings are, getting back to that analog animal, right? We are social creatures. We have evolved not with the biggest bodies or the fastest legs or the largest sets of teeth as the kind of alpha predator creature of this earth. We've evolved because we are the most social animal. And that socialization, that need to have connections and conversation and learn from the world around us and the people around us, that is the core of our existence and our intelligence and our success. And that's the thing that I miss the most. Conversations with friends, meaningful interactions with families, that casual chit chat. It was the thing that I sought out and made the biggest, I'm in Canada. I would go for walks with friends in snowstorms in the middle of those years, because it was, I was dying on the inside being at home alone or at home with my, wife and 2 kids all day, every day inside. And this version of the socializing, the Zoom chats and the Zoom cocktail party. I mean, you couldn't pay me to do that. If you had opened a company called 1-800 Zoom Cocktail Party, I would have shorted that company. I would have made billions. I would have been like the guy from The Big Short. There's a story in
the book about you showing up for a Zoom cocktail party, and you realized it was a con job because you're the only one with a cocktail.
Yeah, apparently the alcoholism only went so far.
Now, Matt, in your role, some people find it interesting that I say that you, that I introduced you today as Matt Fordal, who's our managing editor at 1-800-Flowers. People say managing editor at 1-800-Flowers, but I think it speaks to what David's remembering from the earliest days of COVID that we felt, which really gave birth to you and your team and the things that you do. And it's the relationships that David just spoke about, but it was also, as he was intimating at the end, it's those little micro contacts that we have throughout the day that we didn't before COVID really understand the value of those. A wave to the barber as you pass his shop, who you go to regularly, who sees you and waves. It's the person at the office you're visiting, who's at the front desk, who says hello, asks how your weekend was. It's the barista who knows your first name and knows what you like to drink. It's all those little micro contacts that add up and make a significant difference in our life. It's not just that warm, loving embrace when you get home at the end of the day from your significant other. It's all those contacts that go into how we feel. Matt, we started writing about that a lot, didn't we?
Yeah, we sure did. And starting, I think it was in March of 2020, we started writing a newsletter to our customers and touching on exactly those topics and trying to remind people the need to connect with people, and to use your words, Jim, use your power of connection to reach out and strengthen those relationships. And one of the things I was struck by in this book is David does a great job of defining the misery and the difficulty of the pandemic and the lockdown and what the kids were doing, and the disaster that virtual education was. But you go a step further, which I really appreciated. You look pre-pandemic in many instances and say that wasn't perfect. We were being promised a digital nirvana at this time, but workplaces, schools, they weren't exactly hitting the mark. So I think that really positions us to a point of figuring out what the new normal actually is, and it gives us some agency in making that decision.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think the question is, how do we get to this place, right? How did we get to the point where we were being sold and buying into this notion that, this thing will be and whatever's in it is going to be the solution to whatever problem we have. So now, the technology du jour is ChatGPT and other sort of AI machine learning programs. And it's like, the problem of supply chain management, the problem of HR, the problem of content writing, this is it. Like, education, this is going to be the thing that unlocks it. And the reality is there is no silver bullet answer, right? It's someone I quoted, or I spoke to him in the chapter about education. He's like, it's hand-to-hand street combat. And that's how you improve schools. And that's how you improve community relations. I wrote about the value of conversation, to human physical health and mental health. And, isolation and loneliness is the biggest public health crisis in the United States and across the Western world, and increasingly in the developing world. More people are spending more time alone with fewer close friends and fewer relationships, and technology plays a big role in fostering that. And it has a tremendous detrimental effect on people's mental health in terms of anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts, but also in terms of their physical health, substance abuse, alcoholism, drug abuse, overdoses, suicide, other forms of self-harm. But even accidental death is higher, or accidental injury is higher for people who experience loneliness and isolation. And there are people who propose that the solution to this is technological. In countries like Japan, they sort of pioneered this. You have an aging population. There's a senior population that's increasingly lonely and isolated, and that leads to bad health, but there's not enough people to staff the care homes. So what they've done is invented animatronic stuffed animals. Like, you can get a stuffed baby seal and it'll purr at you and ask how you're doing in Japanese. And Mrs. Yakashima will supposedly feel better about herself, right? In her home in Kyoto or whatever, where children aren't visiting her. And that is a sort of tragic outcome that underlies the problem and isn't a real sort of solution. So it's hard. It's a difficult thing to say, okay, we actually need to find ways to make socializing, make conversation a bigger part of public health, a bigger part of people's lives. That's a huge needle to move than saying, oh, buy this thing, it's going to make it better.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. Made with love at every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, we know you're sending more than a gift. 1-800-Flowers, share with love.
It sounds like you're a big believer in anti-absolutism. Nothing is going to be absolute. The pendulum is always going to swing back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, this is why, communism and fascism and all these extreme absolutist ideologies always fail, because the world doesn't work in absolutes. It simply doesn't. So
give me the other side.
Analog reality isn't binary. It's not either or. It's everything and it's messy and it's slow, but that's the beauty of it, and that's what the strength of it lies. This is what works for companies, right? It's like, you're going to invest all your money in this one technology, and that's going to be your solution. You're probably going to miss out on something.
Good luck, yeah. But I think that the phrase you just used, "it's always and," is the great takeaway for me from your book. And let me ask you to pull on that a little bit. What things about technology that we dramatically embraced during COVID, your book being a pandemic book, as you said, and in preparing and writing The Future is Analog, what tools did we acquire? And I'm thinking of a couple myself that can make our analog lives, our relationship lives, a little better, a little richer. We're working with, you mentioned the robots in Japan. There's a technology company here that we're working with at Flowers to make available on a test basis to a few of our community members something called LEQ, which is a robot which would have conversational capability for someone who lives alone, maybe someone with a disability. Reminder to take medications. Their loved ones can check in with them and have real-time conversations frequently throughout the day. I don't think that's the absolute fix, but it can be contributory. It can be and to help make a better and more safer, richer life for that individual and their family.
I think that nails it, right? And it's what are the things that are supplementary and complementary to life? What are the technologies that we can use to make things easier, better? So we can have this conversation and it's done remotely. Now, this existed before the pandemic, but now it's so much more widespread and people know it and use it. And it is something that is much more ubiquitous and cheaper. And there's more sort of options on this, right?
More content, so, your world.
Yeah, more content, your world, exactly. The ability, let's say that a number of different small businesses may not have had digital capabilities beforehand, and now they have much more capabilities. So it might be easier to go and order something or pay for something and make a reservation for somewhere, and that might make it easier for you to get out and get that coffee with your friend because you don't have cash on you. But all of a sudden, everybody has their tapping ability or something along those lines. I think
are you deliberate now, David, about your own relationships, using technology as a tool to stay more connected with more people, fewer people? How is it impacting your deliberate behaviors to make sure you're investing in those relationships that matter to you and your family?
Yeah. I think it's something that I've been thinking about for years since I started writing the previous book. So this is almost a decade ago. It is a real consciousness of, during the activity that I'm doing, whether it's work or social or whatever, do I need to use technology now? Is it actually going to make it better? Or am I just holding it like a light emitting pacifier? While my kids are at swim class.
That line too. That's another I'll borrow.
Yeah, well, my kids are at swim class in 3 hours from now, and it's like, all right, I don't know how much water I need to watch my son ingest. What's on this magical light device? When I could be talking to the parent next to me who is a community member, and I might actually learn something.
Let me stop you there. You're at the pool. You have a good idea. Do you write it down? Do you dictate it? Do you send yourself an email? Do you put it in notes? What do you do?
If I have a piece of paper, I'll write it down. If I just have my phone, I do the send myself an email thing. Notes it gets lost. But there are times in my book writing process where I am very deliberate. Like if I'm brainstorming through ideas for the outline of something, I'm doing that on paper. Often I'm using huge sheets of paper that are, these big 3M Post-it notes that I have to buy at Office Depot, that are these giant things with sticky notes and everything on it. I need to see it visually, and then I'm going to type that up into a Word document.
But it's a process. That's how
print
your
it
brain
out,
works.
and
got to write it down.
That's how my brain works. I just got a typewriter the other day because I did a book talk at a wonderful store called Philadelphia Typewriter, America's premier typewriter boutique. But now I'm like, all right, when am I going to use this typewriter? Like, I'll do it for fun. I'll type out notes, but like, how, now that I'm thinking about another book in this part of the creative process, how can this tool help me? That's going to be different from this laptop that I'm talking to you on, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's thinking about it. And then there are other things where I'm very deliberate. I'm on vacation. My phone is on do not disturb, or I'm turning it off, or I'm leaving it in the hotel. On the weekends, usually on a Saturday or something, or I will leave my phone away or turn it on do not disturb or turn it off. Because I'm saying this is a time where I'm deliberately do not need this thing. And unless I require it, I am going to leave it by the wayside, because I know that in this period of time, it's going to do so much more negative than positive for me. But there are other times when it's like, all right, when do I need this? How can I make a reservation? What app do I need to get from point A to point D? And so I think it's being deliberate about it and being critical about the technology rather than just accepting it as an all-around good or a vital necessity that you cannot do without. If we can engage in critical thinking around digital technology, then we're going to have a better relationship with it at the end of the day, regardless of how it evolves or what the next iteration of it is.
Matt, I'll ask you the same question. So think about it. But I'm just thinking, this past weekend, I was in California for to play in a Pro-Am golf event, and it was great fun. And there are a whole bunch of guys. I brought my spouse, a few others did too. But it used to be just an all guys event, and now it's morphed into being couples. And there are almost 40 of us guys who have been doing this, and now a larger number with our spouses coming. But I feel close to these guys, even though I might not have had a conversation with them during the course of this year, because we created a whole bunch of different text communities, and we're sharing jokes, and we're commenting on something, or someone did something in business. It's in the newspaper. We all share it. This morning, one of our friends had a piece in Fortune magazine about an activist situation that's going on. We all distributed that. We commented, hey, that really interesting piece. I find it helps me to maintain relationships, particularly casual relationships, more and better. because if I'd gone a year without any contact, it wouldn't have been that warm embrace when I see them again this year, or the deepness of the smile because of things we've shared through the year. Do you find yourself using tools to maintain and develop relationships?
I certainly do. I know with my family in particular, we're constantly texting each other little jokes and memes, and I'm currently sending my 16-year-old old school comic strips from like the 1930s and 40s, just to get him thinking about what humor was so far ago.
Free TikTok.
Basically, it's an effort to peel him away from TikTok and those other things, and it gives us something to talk about too when he comes home from school or over the weekend when we're just sitting around the house.
How old are your kids, David?
Oh, they're 9 and 6. I mean, they're
okay. So you have the do they get a mobile device question coming up, huh?
Oh, yes. The 9-year-old is lobbying. The lobbying has begun.
Matt's are older. He's got one in college.
The younger one, the 16-year-old, I wish sometimes I'd never introduced him to the mobile phone, because I'm now trying to teach him how to drive. And when he's in the passenger seat of the car, I'm trying to explain to him, okay, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And he's watching a TikTok or
filming a TikTok of dad trying to teach me to drive a car.
Going back, though, to organization and the tools that we can use, I had an interesting experience this weekend where we had a big Zoom meeting with folks in procurement, folks in quality assurance, just trying to dig into the company and how we maintain quality. And it's a fantastic story. And I got the AI transcript of this meeting, and I thought, okay, all set. I'll just fix a few things. It was nonsensical. That it got all the names wrong. It repeated words. It was difficult. So what I ended up doing is just taking the video and replaying it at half speed and taking written notes from it. And it was a much, much better experience, even though it did take a little bit more time. And,
David, your point was all of these things are getting better all the time, and they're never absolute. They're end.
Yeah.
Now, I have grandchildren, and the oldest is 14, and the next is 11, and the 11-year-old just had a birthday January 1st and got his first mobile device. And, his parents held the line. All my friends have it. I'm the only one who doesn't, but I'm glad that my daughter and her husband held out. It then came down to a balancing act between safety, convenience, accessibility, that a couple of parents decided 11 was the right moment.
I've never spoken to a parent who looked back on giving their kid a mobile device with happiness.
Never, yeah.
That's it's a friend, our neighbor, did their daughter's 11. She got one. She's like, that's it. She's lost. Like there's a part of it that's just, we see it in ourselves, right? I'm sure kids would notice it too if they weren't born with their parents with it, but it's like, there is just a portion of their attention that you are competing with from now on.
No question.
You don't have the algorithms of the team of MBAs or, Stanford engineers and make you more interesting. All you have is a bunch of like Popeye comic strips in the 1930s.
And the ability to sound like your parents saying there'll be none of that at this table.
Yeah, that's it. And clothes and shelter. But
David, when you're working on a subject, your kids, do they know what you're working on? Are they listening? Do they ever ask questions while you're in process?
Not so. I mean, they're very young. So, now they're getting to the age where they're a little more curious, but, it's like, oh, you have a book, another book. Wow. Okay. They came to my book launch this time, in Toronto, which was, they sort of got to see a little bit of how it's done, but, it's, I sort of explain it to them and they couldn't care less. Maybe they'll write a memoir about it one day.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that, given
Yeah.
the focus you put on education and ed tech, actually in both books. What kinds of conversations do you have with their teachers and the superintendents about the technology that the kids are being introduced to at school?
I mean, I think it would be very difficult to find a teacher or a school administrator anywhere at this point, or a parent that is all in for a technology-driven educational future. I think they all understand that there's a balance. These are tools and technologies that they're going to need to learn, but they need to do it in a way that is critical, is conscientious of it, balances what it can do and what it can't do, which is what we're talking about with the chatbot that you were using, or any new technology that might be implementing in the business gym. Their teachers do that with them already. With, my daughter does her assignment. She's got to do a book report today, and I think does it in Google Docs. That's the way it's sort of done within the classroom with the laptops they're given. But it's like they're teaching them how to source things online. They're teaching them what, the critical thinking around technology. That's really clever. And I think that mindset, the pandemic did that to really shift the mindset of teachers who in the past, or administrators more like, the teachers knew, they were on the ground. They saw what was happening. But administrators are often like, oh, every kid needs an iPad because that's the future. Every kid needs a device. There were private schools. It was like every kid gets to bring their phone, and almost to a T, every one of those schools is like, nope, no kids get to bring their phone. This is a disaster. And so I think I've had those conversations with people in education, but they've all been to the other side now, and they see what it's like. And if the other side is this for school, nobody wants that. It's a pretty grim thing. Oh, sorry.
Don't
Jim,
you think, though, that technology has the potential to heal the great divide? Because I saw during COVID, living here in the New York area, the mayor was complimenting himself, patting himself on the back that, look what we managed. Education went on. We didn't miss a beat. Yet I know that there's no internet capability in public housing where there's 600,000 people live. That means all of those kids were falling further and further behind because they didn't have a PC. They might not have had electric, never mind an internet connection. So, but it does seem to me that good access to technology can help groups that are behind to catch up.
Well, so this has been, again, the promise of ed tech, and this goes back decades, right? Even before computers, right? Is this technology is, we have an unequal education system, more unequal in the US than most other Western countries. What is, this, but if everyone gets a computer and access to the internet, everyone's going to have access to the best schools and the best whatever. And again, it's this silver bullet. This is a really simple solution to this incredibly complex question. So on the one hand, let's reform the tax code so that, unlike other Western countries, the US will have equal taxation for public school students across the jurisdiction and across like a state, right? Mm-hmm. That's never going to fly in America. So it's like, all right, everyone gets an iPad. And what happens? It's been tried in Los Angeles and North Carolina and South Carolina and all these places, and all the studies have come out. And what happens is that it just exacerbates the inequality. And this is what we saw in COVID, right?
But you had a good anecdote in your book about children sharing an iPad, 3 or 4 children sharing an iPad, and they're learning something from sharing that iPad. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. This is something that Michael Rich, who heads up the Boston Children's Hospital Center for sort of children and media, and deals with kids with media addiction, and looks at kind of studies about the best way to use technology and children for their health, said like the information is coming out that 1-to-1 that every kid should have a device isn't the best thing. That having a bunch of kids sharing a device is actually better because they learn from each other. They're able to have conversations. Education is fundamentally an act that's social, just like work is, right? It's the idea that we can all just be sitting alone at home in these kind of atomized cubes like we are right now. And that is sort of better for us and more productive, is flies in the face of what actually we know about collaboration, about learning. And again, gets back to that heart of the thing. We are social creatures. We work We learn in a way that is fundamentally social and emotional, and you can't do that when you're isolated and sitting. So one is that question of access, right, Jim, what you're talking about, which is that in public schools in New York, in private schools everywhere, what happened when everybody got the technology, when everyone got online, the learning inequality was exacerbated. The poor kids, the kids in public housing, the Black kids, the brown kids, they did worse. And it wasn't just in the US, it was all over the world. And the ones at the top who had the most resources did not, it wasn't like they improved, but they maybe showed the least amount of loss. Nobody did better. Nobody did better. That's the sad. I mean, there were the few cases, and again, this is where it's like, where is technology good? For certain individuals, people with physical disabilities, people with certain learning disabilities, or perhaps on the spectrum of autism, it proved helpful or proved an aid to some students, but 90+% did worse or maybe maintained it with the slight loss. But the ones who did the absolute worst were the ones that are already at a disadvantage. And so the promise that the technology would be this great equalizer has not come to pass, just as it hasn't come to pass in many other aspects of our society.
At the end of your book, The Future is Analog, David, you talk about a mutual friend of ours, Vint Cerf. Matt and I had occasion not too long ago to chat with him about where's technology going, where's the world going. And when he starts talking about interplanetary communications and what he's doing there, my eyes glaze over a bit and I want to pull the covers over my head. But talk a little bit about how you think about his point of view in terms of technology and its impact on our culture.
Well, what my conversation with Vint was really interesting because I was referred to him by a gentleman named Brock Hinsman, who's a futurist in Silicon Valley, but not someone who just says, oh, this is the next technology, you got to buy it, but like who thinks very deeply about the challenges we're going to have in the future in terms of the environment and climate and, big picture stuff and how technology fits into it. And he put me in touch with Vint. And for those who don't know him, Vint Cerf is one of the most brilliant computer scientists and thinkers in world history. I mean, he's one of the inventors of the internet, this little thing you may have heard of. And we had this conversation and, we talked about it. He said, we're doing amazing things with virtual reality, artificial intelligence, all these things. But he said, we can't think of these things as a replacement for our relationships, for being out in the world, for these social things. And I think it gets back to this either or question and the and question that we were talking about before, Jim. When we look to digital as a substitute or replacement for what I'm calling the analog world, right? For physical spaces, for person-to-person relationships, for the interactions that happen when you're out beyond your screen, then that's when we lose something. And that's when we lose our way, and that's when we get lost. And he was talking about, Mark Zuckerberg had announced that Facebook was pivoting to become Meta and the metaverse very shortly before we had our conversation. And he said, you can do wonderful things with virtual reality. He was describing work he was doing, disassembling a rocket engine with virtual reality to show.
I was going to do that this weekend too, but I was.
Well, it's busy. A hobby. I prefer an analog rocket engine personally. I work on some missile systems just in my spare time. But he's saying that's great. But the idea that we're going to strap screens to our eyes and that's going to replace having a meal with someone, seeing your friends at your golf tournament once a year. Oh, we can't make it to the real golf tournament, but why don't we go to virtual Pebble Beach and you strap on your goggles and I'll strap on, we'll get in the simulator and hit the links. I'm not a golfer, so excuse me. That in no way should be the replacement. That is lessening our human experience, right? And this comes back to this central idea of like, what is our future? I hope a lot of our future is like our past and our present, right? Because the things that I get joy from, the things that I get value from, the things that drive me in work or family or community or life, I don't need those to change. I don't want those to change. I don't want sourdough
better
bread.
And more.
Better, more, I want more time cuddling with my kids. I don't want to do it through some thing. If I want to pet a baby seal, I want to pet a baby seal. I don't want an animatronic seal or a puppy. I don't have too many baby seals in my life.
Matt and I have worked a lot in the last a couple of few years about something you talked about earlier, which you just touched on again, which is this loneliness epidemic. I first really became aware of it back in 2018 with a couple of editors at the Wall Street Journal did a piece on my generation, the baby boomers, and how we were the loneliest generation for some big macro kinds of reasons. But lo and behold, Generation Z and millennials have raised hands and said, oh, no, we're even lonelier than you. And it may all be true. And I think you're right. The impact COVID has had on our collective mental health, as you talk about, is something we'll be dealing with for quite some time. I do hope that we have an end here, an A-N-D, and which is that we learn to use technology effectively so it enhances our relationships, so it gives us more opportunity to connect with the people, or that we save a trip to have a meeting because we already have a relationship, but we don't have to go to Chicago 6 times a year now. We can go 3 times a year because we have a foundation of a relationship. We can do digital kinds of communications like this to keep the relationship going. And that's 3 more trips that I'm going to be with my wife and my kids and my grandkids that might have been stolen from me if I had to make the trip. So how does END play a role in making the things that are really important, relationships, human contact, human sensitivity, genuine multidimensional interactivity, more and better? But I'm glad that we had this technology today, David, because we got to chat with you and learn from you and pull some great ideas from you. And so I hope the technology has given us more time to bring your great thinking, your great ideas, and to encourage every book club. My wife, I was telling my wife last night, flying home, that I was going to have an opportunity to speak to you today. And she said, oh, that book sounds like it'd be terrific for our book club. And indeed, I think a lot of book clubs were born during COVID. And I completely agree with my wife, Mary Lou, that this book, How to Create a More Human World, The Future is Analog, by the great David Sax, would be a wonderful thing for your book club to talk about, to think about, because, David, you'll inspire us all to think about those relationships that matter, big and small, and how do we invest our time and our energy in making them more and better. David, thanks for your time and your wisdom today.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Matt. It's a real pleasure to be here, even though I'm still in my house.
Thank you. And next time we'll do it in person.
Over pastrami, as I'm
Yes.
told. You must be in California, Matt, because I see the map behind you. California has some great pastrami too.
No, he's in New Jersey, but he's
Oh.
from California, so it reminds him where he's from.
Exactly.
You
A
really
nice,
need that reminder.
A nice analog map.
It's the best kind.
Thanks, guys.
The Google one doesn't print out as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Go
David.
to 1-800-Flowers.com.
Find the perfect gift.
And wow the people you love.
Wow. This is amazing.
Whether you want to say happy birthday
So cute.
Or I love you.
I love you too.
thinking of you.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com.
Celebrate the people you love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Celebrations Chatter. You can join our community by reaching out at chatter@celebrations.com. And while you're at it, tell us what topics you'd like us to explore here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to share it forward.